Good day to you all, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to James Knight on the subject of Iraq. I must apologise straight off for a very heavy cold and cough and sore throat, which hopefully won't impair my voice too much. But it's a divisive subject which has never really threatened to die down, and rightly so, and has for several months revived in a major way. The Christian community, at least the community in my area, have opened this up onto one or two of their websites so that people could contribute to this discussion. I've also received some written questions and comments during their alpha course, their recent alpha course, as it was put forward to them, so those who didn't have access to the website could comment. I do also have a list of questions and comments here, which I will try to work into my case as we begin to progress through it. And there might be an opportunity also for you to debate with me on one of our local radio stations at some point as well. That might be in the pipeline. The tenor of my case here is set out is to say from the outset that I think the Iraq War was both just and necessary. The same is true also of our fight against terrorism. Now I know there are people, perhaps even some of you, who do not support our efforts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other Middle Eastern quagmires, nor do they take delight in the fact that Iraq has been moved to a post-Saddam era. Well, I want to say straight off that I do take delight in that. I'm immensely proud of the great work of our men and women in our armed forces as they risk their lives and their good health to bring stability to a region that's been left to a life of violence and murder for far too long. Much popular thought has seen to it that to speak up in favour of good work that we are doing in Iraq involves being quarantined into the silent minority. Well, I want to counter that supposition from the outset and show in this message why it's a false assumption. It's certainly true that this particular false assumption contaminates within itself, therefore it may be equally true that it cannot be vanquished in such a brief message as this that I'm delivering. Whatever length this message ends up reaching, there will always be lots more to say to discredit the anti-war propagandists and those who take a blithe approach to the situation. It's my intention to present a case on the Iraq War that takes an almost opposite view to the view held by the majority, I'm sorry to say. I've said before that the consensus sometimes provides false security, and that one should see how falsehood evolves with such rapidity that it can be hard to get the ground back that was lost. We see, therefore, that with the subject, that if ever there were a palpable example of this happening, it's exemplified here with the subject of Iraq. I don't mean, of course, that consensus should always be mistrusted. Very often the consensual opinion is the right one, but one should not believe something purely on the grounds that it is consensual. I'll show how this has happened in the case of the Iraq War, but before we do explore further, we must at least agree that at least some of the wars in the world's history have been both just and necessary, in which case we must reject the position taken by the pacifist, and that's where I should begin before I state my case. Pacifism is little more than a fanciful form of idealism, negated by the nature of mankind, in my view. Some people have demanded to know how I can support the Iraq War and still be a Christian. Well, instead they suggest that as a Christian I should be adopting a pacifist view. I want to tell you right away that I do not think the view of the pacifist is the right one. Some pacifists turn to Christ's instruction. They say, he said, love your neighbour as yourselves. as proof that they're right? Well, I'll tell you why I think they're wrong. But before I do, we must first agree that we do all know the difference between right and wrong, and that our intuitive knowledge of right and wrong is as powerful as any of the senses. Our moral feeling is a strange entity. It should be admitted that there are some moral positions in which we cannot be argued out of, any more than we can argue a woman into tasting onion when she's tasting cucumber, or arguing a woman into seeing pink when she's seeing grey. But it is true that some of us can have our minds changed as regards moral positions. If an argument is presented to us which shows a better side to the argument, for example, a feeling of what is right and wrong can mean two things. It can either mean that we feel compelled to do the right thing, or it can mean a judgment about the nature of right and wrong. In the first sense, the moral law has the final say, and we should not argue with it or attempt to change it. But as regards right and wrong, it is sometimes more tricky. That's to say, people are susceptible to errors when thinking about right and wrong. It's here that we must bring in reason, of course. Reason tells us about what is true and what is false. In the first place, we receive facts, either from our own senses or from other people's, and we use our reason to ascertain their validity as regards truth and falsehood. Now, certainly it is true that the vast majority come from elsewhere, not from our own senses, but the ones which come from our own senses are known intuitively. If a truth is self-evident, then it must be perceived intuitively, as in mathematics, and as we've just seen in our ascent to the moral law. After we've coordinated all the information from the mind and checked the interrelation between outside authority and our own intuition, we are in a position to ascertain them in a true-false analysis. It is true that some people do not have very good abilities in achieving this result. Others do have the abilities, but they do not do a very good job of using them, and some obstinately avoid the truth at all costs. But the extent at which a person comes to conclusions does not detract from the fact that intuition and perception do allow us to come to these conclusions about morality and external information. Anytime we correct someone's reasoning, we are either correcting their attempts at coordination, or we are correcting the information which they received. The intuitive facet cannot be altered. You can offer a man newer and better information, or you can help him with his coordination, but you cannot show him a self-evident truth if he cannot see it. Now, I don't say that this is all too frequent. Very often can't should be replaced with won't see, particularly in the case of people seeing the truth about Christianity, for example. It's more that they won't see than can't see. But when the person in question really does lack the cranial capacity to see a self-evident truth, you cannot argue them into it. You cannot elicit intuition by rational persuasion. If a person's intuition is defective, it's incorrigible, it can't be mended. It does not automatically follow that no external influence or emotional variances will alter in a positive way, but it is not amenable to improvement by reasoning. It's not always realized, but reason itself does not tell us very much about what we know, not in comparison to external information. In fact, most of our information is not obtained from reason or rational argument. Our moral intuition, therefore, consists of three elements. External facts, like, for example, the information needed to decide if the Iraq War is moral or immoral. Our intuition as regards right and wrong, our assent to the moral law, that is, and the rationale with which we do our coordinating to reach a sound conclusion. Thus, we see that reasoning is a very different thing to conscience on this matter.